"Did you prompt him in any way to do that?" asked Albert thoughtfully. "No," said Languedoc curtly. The president had been agitated the entire morning and was unusually lucid. "I was in a meeting when I was informed that the president had gotten loose." "Gotten loose?" quoted Albert incredulously. "What was the Secret Service doing? Taking a nap?" "They're not prison guards, Albert." "No, I suppose they're more like orderlies at this point. Damn you, Nurse Rashid." Languedoc remained silent. "What I mean is," continued Albert, ignoring Languedoc's discomfort, "you didn't plant the idea in his head that the members of his administration were conspiring against him." Languedoc shook his head. Good. We can work with this, and perhaps solve both of our problems in one fell swoop. But we'll need the backing of the military." And at that moment, to Languedoc, the darkly deserted Lincoln Memorial might as well have been the landscape of the moon, or Belarus. They drove directly to the Pentagon, sitting on either ends of the back bench of Albert's black town car as a security agent drove. The streets were quiet and well lit. "If she is gone, he cannot remain president," which was the sentence that heralded the beginning of the conversation's tailspin, as they had spent the better part of an hour fishtailing on the black ice of sedition. General Robert Johnson was a square man, with a broad face and large hands, and when he set his jaw after such a pronouncement, Languedoc was filled with the icy certainty that this was not a negotiating tactic. Albert, as though sensing Languedoc had at that moment experienced a dark epiphany, turned and stared at him for a brief moment, assessing the rigidity of his resolve. "Well, that presents us with a very serious problem, Robert, because if we are going to dispose of the vice president based upon the assertion that she was illegally coordinating to deploy the 25th Amendment, then we in turn cannot deploy that same article to depose of him. I will not take orders from a president that is not in his right mind, and you do not wish this country to be led by a Marxist," stated the general bluntly. Too true, confirmed Albert, with all the cordiality of one who is wallowing in gossip. "Unlike many of our contemporaries, I am able to recall in vivid detail the wretched swath of misery that the Iron Curtain cast across Europe." The general stared at him with quietly calibrating eyes. "You can imagine that I might be made slightly uncomfortable by your explicit listing of political preferences as you attempt to convince me that the intelligence agencies and the armed forces should be used to disrupt our democratic institutions." Robert, laughed Albert gently. "You are throwing out the baby with the bathwater, and yet still somehow have managed to miss the forest for the trees." The general stared at him intently. "Because if nothing else, what our mutual predicament clearly indicates is that if you are willing to have the conversation, you've already lost the game." "That stupid bitch, that stupid whore, I'll see her hanged," seethed the president as he swept the pens and ornaments off of what had been, until a few moments ago, only a ceremonial seat of authority. The president then seized a pencil that had survived the radical change of decor and began vigorously chewing on its eraser. General Johnson sat rigid in his chair, his dark face seemingly drained of color. Languedoc was amazed by the persistence of the president's lucidity. For the past 2 days he had alternated between bouts of rage and scathing introspection, as he had attempted to arrange an increasingly erratic constellation of meetings with the political allies, enemies, and foreign diplomats, many whom were dead, that had once in better days plastered his political resume like bugs on a windshield. Languedoc and the rest of the president's staff had spent the majority of their time attempting to prevent the spread of the president's animus into the world beyond. "And so it is the assessment of those present," stuttered the general, seemingly in a daze, "that the ability to resolve the problem at hand exceeds the scope of authority of the traditional powers which are granted the executive authority of a civilian government." The president whipped the pencil from his mouth and laid it wetly on the desk. "How solid is your intelligence?" asked the president, his eyes roaming the room as though he were scanning a landscape 100 yards behind them. "Mr. President," spoke up Albert, from his position by the door, "we can confirm beyond a shadow of a doubt that the meetings in question took place and involved the Vice President, high-ranking persons on her staff, a number of cabinet members, and top-level government officials for the purpose of coordinating a campaign which would remove you from your office by invoking the powers of the 25th Amendment." "Shit, muttered the President. "And your findings confirm this?" demanded the President, staring at General Johnson with eyes that were rimmed red and yet dark like a sun eclipsed by the moon. "Yes," spoke the General, in a voice that passed through lips that barely parted. "There is unanimous consensus in both the military and the intelligence community." "Just like Iraq," said the President, as he tilted back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. The room was silent as they attempted to decipher if the comparison was meant as a pejorative or a recommendation. "We have a list, sir," interjected Albert, "with the names of all those whom the Vice President conspired with to remove you from office. However, we are powerless to act unless you declare the situation to be an imminent threat to national security." They waited for a response on tenterhooks. Eventually, Languedoc moved close to the President and bent close to examine his face. His eyes were closed, and he breathed deeply after the manner of dreams. "He's asleep," observed Languedoc, who was far too exhausted to weigh his voice with the credulity that the scenario warranted. Albert laughed. "Telegrams from the loony bin. We apprehended most of the names on that list an hour ago." "So what was the point of all this?" asked the General dejectedly. "I would much rather stand on the ceremony than trip over it," quipped Albert happily as he strode from the room. "Come with me, Languedoc. I want you to see this." And he went. Albert was the only one that ever pronounced his name correctly anyways.